The traffic stop. It was a warm Friday evening in downtown Rivertown, a city where everyone seemed to be in a hurry to get somewhere. The streets buzzed with the hum of engines and the faint, fading laughter of friends making their way into bars, signaling the weekend's arrival. Judge Maya Lawson, one of the most respected members of the community, was heading home after a long day in court. She had a reputation for being fair but firm, a woman with an unshakable dedication to justice and truth. As she navigated the winding suburban streets leading to her neighborhood, Maya allowed her mind to drift. She was looking forward to spending time with her daughter, Simone, who was back from college. It had been months since they'd had a proper mother-daughter day, and Maya had meticulously planned out a weekend of bonding and catching up. But as she passed a familiar intersection, the comforting glow of the streetlights reflected something unusual in her rearview mirror, flashing blue and red lights. Her heart sank, and instinctively, Maya ran through a mental checklist. Seatbelt. Fastened. Speed. Under the limit. Complete stop at the last intersection. Absolutely. She had done nothing wrong. But she knew from years of experience and countless stories from friends and family that this didn't always matter. With a calm yet uneasy breath, Maya pulled her black sedan over to the side of the road. She watched as a young officer stepped out of the police cruiser behind her, striding toward her window with an air of superiority. His hand rested confidently on the handle of his holstered gun, a casual but intentional reminder of authority. His badge gleamed under the streetlight, the name Officer Art Hayes visible as he approached. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone cold and impersonal. Maya met his gaze, her face expressionless, as she handed over her documents. "Evening, officer. May I know what this is about?" Officer Hayes didn't answer right away. Instead, he scrutinized her license with a raised eyebrow. "Judge Lawson," he muttered, more to himself than to her, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Was I speeding, officer?" Maya asked, keeping her voice steady. Hayes paused, his eyes narrowing as he inspected her car, taking in the sleek, well-maintained luxury vehicle. "You rolled through the stop sign back there," he said, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. Maya knew she hadn't missed the stop sign, but she also knew challenging him directly would likely only make things worse. "I see," she replied carefully. "I apologize if it seemed that way." But the officer wasn't finished. With a smirk, he motioned toward her car, nodding with subtle disdain. "Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle?" A pulse of indignation sparked in her, but Maya masked it well. "Is that really necessary, officer?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. He didn't answer. Instead, he repeated his demand more forcefully. "Step out of the car. Now." With a steadying breath, Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, feeling the night air hit her skin. She stood by the hood of her car, watching as Officer Hayes methodically began searching her vehicle, opening compartments, checking under seats, and even looking in the trunk. His actions weren't those of an officer handling a routine stop. It was clear he was searching for something, anything, to justify his treatment of her. Maya clenched her fists, her mind racing with thoughts of all the people who had gone through encounters like this, some with far worse outcomes. She knew she was being targeted. Hayes likely had little idea of who she really was, and it was evident he was operating on a prejudiced assumption based solely on her appearance and her car. After several tense minutes, Officer Hayes came up empty-handed. He handed her back her license and registration, barely meeting her eyes. "You're free to go," he muttered, his tone clipped. Maya took her documents, her hand steady despite the anger bubbling within her. "That's it?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. Hayes avoided her gaze, his face betraying a hint of frustration. "Yes," he replied, retreating to his cruiser without another word. As she got back into her car and drove off, Maya's hands trembled slightly. The ordeal had been brief, but the feeling of injustice lingered. She had done nothing wrong, yet she'd been subjected to suspicion and unwarranted scrutiny. It wasn't just about a minor traffic stop. It was a symbol of the deeply ingrained biases she had fought against her entire career. When Maya finally pulled into her driveway, the excitement she'd felt about the weekend with her daughter had been replaced by a simmering anger. She sat in her car for a moment, replaying the incident in her mind. She thought of all the people who had faced similar, or even more harrowing, encounters, many without the privilege of her title or her knowledge of the law to protect them. Later that night, as she sipped her tea in her quiet living room, the scene continued to haunt her. It wasn't just a single, isolated moment. It was a stark reminder of the systemic issues that plagued the very justice system she dedicated her life to upholding. Simone entered the room, her curious gaze resting on her mother. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Maya looked up, offering her daughter a small, reassuring smile, though the weight of the night still lingered in her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking. Was it that cop who stopped you?" Simone pressed, her face showing a mix of frustration and worry. "It wasn't right, was it? What he did?" Maya sighed, placing her cup down and folding her hands in her lap. "No, it wasn't. And it happens more than you know. It's not just about me, Simone. It's about everyone who goes through this and doesn't have the voice or the means to do something about it." Simone's brow furrowed with a newfound sense of resolve. "Then do something, Mom. You've always fought for justice. Don't stop now." Maya looked into her daughter's eyes, feeling her heart swell with pride. Simone's words ignited something within her, a reminder of why she had chosen this path in the first place. "You're right," she said quietly, more to herself than to her daughter. "This can't keep happening." As Maya sat in silence, a determination began to form, solidifying with every passing second. She'd spent years fighting for justice in the courtroom, but now she realized that the battle extended far beyond its walls. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just the beginning. She would take a stand, not just for herself, but for all those who faced injustice without recourse. With Simone's support and her unwavering commitment to justice, Maya knew what she had to do. She was going to confront the system head-on. And this time, she wasn't backing down. A plan takes shape. The morning light filtered through Maya's kitchen window as she sat at the small wooden table, staring down at a blank notebook. She had barely slept. The encounter with Officer Hayes still played over in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his smirk, felt the sting of indignation, and relived the reminder that no title or career could shield her from the insidious reach of prejudice. As the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, Maya began jotting down her thoughts. Writing had always helped her organize her ideas, and today she needed all the clarity she could get. This wasn't just a minor traffic stop, she reminded herself. This was a pivotal moment. She was no stranger to stories of racial profiling and abuse of power, but experiencing it firsthand had made it unignorable. The sound of footsteps on the stairs brought her attention to Simone, who appeared in the doorway, still groggy but observant. She noticed the open notebook, the furrowed brow, and the tension in her mother's usually calm demeanor. "Up early, Mom," Simone said, grabbing a mug and pouring herself some coffee. She sat across from Maya, sipping and studying her mother's face. Maya glanced up, a mixture of resolve and vulnerability in her expression. "I couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." Simone set her coffee down and leaned forward, her eyes filled with concern. "Are you still thinking about what happened last night?" Maya nodded, then closed the notebook and met her daughter's gaze. "Yes, but it's more than that, Simone. It's about what that stop represents. How many people go through this every day without a voice to defend them? How often does this happen to people who don't have the same resources or influence?" Simone took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "So what are you going to do, Mom? Just let it go?" The question lingered in the air, and Maya felt a swell of determination. Letting it go wasn't an option. She had dedicated her life to upholding justice, to ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background, had a fair shot. Now, with her own experience of injustice, she realized that the fight couldn't just be contained within the courtroom walls. "No," she said finally. "I'm not going to let this go. I'm filing a complaint, but that's only the start. I want to make sure people know this isn't acceptable, and I want accountability, not just for myself, but for everyone who's faced this." Simone's face lit up with pride and worry. "But Mom, aren't you worried? You know how these things go. Once this gets public, people might try to smear you, especially since you're challenging the police." Maya sighed, understanding her daughter's concerns. "I know the risks, Simone. But if I stay silent, then I'm just another part of the problem. I've always believed in fighting for what's right, and if I back down now, what message am I sending? That some people can abuse their power without consequence." Simone nodded slowly, a small smile creeping onto her face. "I get it, Mom. And I'm with you, all the way." Maya reached across the table, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Thank you, Simone. That means the world." After breakfast, Maya called Marcus Washington, a longtime friend and a prominent civil rights attorney. She had worked with him on numerous cases, but this time it was personal. They agreed to meet that afternoon in a quiet cafe near the courthouse, where they could strategize without prying eyes or eavesdropping ears. Later that day, Maya walked into the cozy, dimly lit cafe, spotting Marcus at a corner table. He stood up, giving her a warm hug before they sat down, both of them instinctively leaning forward, ready for a private conversation. "So I heard about your encounter," Marcus said, his expression a mix of empathy and frustration. "You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, especially with someone like you." Maya shook her head. "That's the thing, Marcus. They don't care. I was just another black woman driving an expensive car, and to them, that was reason enough to stop and search me. It didn't matter who I was or what I'd done." Marcus nodded, understanding her anger. "You're right. The system is designed to protect people like Hayes, but that doesn't mean we can't challenge it." They spent the next hour laying out a plan. Marcus suggested filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs, detailing the incident and demanding a thorough investigation. But they both knew that complaints alone rarely led to meaningful change. "We need to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug," Marcus said, his voice low but determined. "Complaints go ignored unless there's public pressure. Once we file this, we need to be prepared to go public if we don't get a proper response." Maya considered this, knowing that going public would come with risks. Her reputation, her career, and even her personal safety could be on the line. But the memory of Hayes's smug expression, his casual disregard, and the many lives affected by similar abuses of power spurred her on. "I'm ready, Marcus," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes, I'm not backing down." They discussed the logistics, creating a timeline of next steps. They would file the complaint, gather any evidence they could, and if needed, turn to the media to ensure transparency. The following morning, Maya submitted the formal complaint to Internal Affairs. In the document, she outlined every detail of the traffic stop, from Hayes's unfounded demand for her to step out of the car to his invasive search and dismissive behavior. She described the sense of injustice, the intimidation, and how she had done everything right, only to be humiliated and degraded. By the afternoon, the news of the complaint had begun circulating within legal circles. Maya could feel the tension building around her as she walked through the courthouse. She was met with curious stares, whispered conversations that ceased as she approached, and even the occasional look of disdain from officers who'd caught wind of the complaint. Simone, sensing the mounting pressure on her mother, became a constant support, encouraging her when the doubts crept in and standing by her as Maya prepared for what was coming. Despite her initial worry, Simone's pride in her mother's determination only grew. One afternoon, as Maya sat in her office, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Marcus with the subject line, "Internal Affairs hearing date set." She opened it, her heart pounding as she scanned the details. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and it would be her chance to face the system and demand accountability. Taking a deep breath, Maya closed her eyes, allowing a sense of resolve to settle over her. She knew this would be a grueling process, that the police department would likely close ranks, and that they would attempt to discredit her at every turn. But she was ready. Later that evening, as she sat with Simone in the living room, she shared the news about the hearing. Simone listened, her eyes wide with both excitement and apprehension. "Mom," she said softly, her hand resting on Maya's shoulder, "you're the strongest person I know. If anyone can make a change, it's you." Maya smiled, feeling the weight of her daughter's support lifting her spirits. "Thank you, Simone. I'll need every bit of strength I can get." Simone nodded, her eyes filled with admiration. "You're fighting for so much more than just yourself, Mom. You're fighting for everyone who's ever felt powerless, everyone who's ever been humiliated or mistreated. And that's worth everything." As Maya sat with her daughter, a quiet determination took root. This was no longer just about her encounter with Officer Hayes. It was about challenging a broken system, shining a light on the injustices that so many endured in silence. She knew the journey ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles, but with her daughter's support and her unyielding commitment to justice, she felt ready. Maya took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. The fight for justice wasn't limited to the courtroom. It was a battle that reached every corner of society. And this time, she would make sure the voices of those silenced by fear and oppression were heard. The stakes were high, but Maya was willing to risk it all. Preparing for the hearing. The week leading up to the internal affairs hearing passed in a whirlwind. Maya threw herself into preparing every detail, gathering evidence, reviewing documents, and refining her argument. Although she had spent years defending and prosecuting cases in the courtroom, this hearing felt entirely different. She wasn't just representing a client. She was fighting for herself and for a much larger cause. Justice for those who faced this kind of treatment daily, without the resources or platform she possessed. Each night, Maya returned home to the comforting presence of Simone, who kept her mother focused and grounded. Their late-night conversations often circled back to the moment that had sparked this entire journey. Simone, though young, was a source of profound wisdom and insight. The experience had lit a fire in her, too, sparking a fierce determination to stand beside her mother in the fight against injustice. One evening, as Maya sat at her dining table surrounded by documents, Simone brought over 2 mugs of tea and placed one in front of her mother, sitting down beside her. "Mom," Simone began, her tone thoughtful, "I've been doing some research. I read about other people who went through similar experiences. Some of them filed complaints, but most were either ignored or quietly dismissed." Maya nodded, taking a sip of her tea. "I know, Simone. That's why this fight is so important. The system is designed to protect itself. Complaints disappear, investigations stall, and people move on. But I'm not willing to let this go." Simone looked down at her hands, fidgeting slightly. "What if they try to make you look bad? Or they twist things? I mean, you're a judge, but you're going up against the police. It's risky." Maya placed a comforting hand over her daughter's. "I understand the risks, Simone. They might try to discredit me, to paint this as some overreaction. But I'm not doing this just for myself. I'm doing it for everyone who has ever felt helpless and powerless in the face of authority." Simone nodded, her eyes filled with admiration. "I'm proud of you, Mom." Maya smiled, grateful for her daughter's unwavering support. "Thank you, sweetie. Knowing I have you by my side makes all the difference." The next day, Maya met with Marcus in his office to go over the final preparations for the hearing. His office, filled with books on civil rights, legal cases, and social justice, was a testament to his dedication to fighting for the underrepresented. Marcus gestured for her to sit as he cleared a stack of papers off his desk. "We're in for a challenge, Maya. They'll likely bring in officers to testify in Hayes' defense. They may even try to paint this as a misunderstanding, or say he was just doing his job." Maya took a deep breath, her expression resolute. I know they'll try every tactic in the book to undermine me, but we have evidence. I want to make it clear that this isn't just about one encounter. It's about the pattern of behavior and abuse of power." Marcus nodded, handing her a file. "Here's everything we have so far. I pulled up cases from other victims of racial profiling by the police department. Some of these didn't go anywhere, but they establish a pattern. If they try to dismiss this as a one-off incident, we'll be ready." Maya flipped through the file, her eyes scanning stories that echoed her own. Families who had been stopped and searched without cause, young men detained for hours, black women harassed under the guise of routine checks. The stories, each one haunting and heartbreaking, fueled her resolve. "They've gotten away with this for too long," she murmured, closing the file. "We can't let them brush this under the rug." Marcus leaned back, studying her. "I have to ask, Maya, are you ready for what comes after this? Even if we win, there might be backlash. People may question your character, and you could lose favor with colleagues or even face threats." Maya looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I'm prepared for whatever comes, Marcus. If we don't stand up now, when will we? This is bigger than me. I can't just turn my back on it." Marcus nodded, his expression one of respect. "Then let's get to work." The morning of the hearing arrived, bringing with it a mix of nerves and determination. Maya, dressed in a dark, tailored suit, standing before her mirror to check her reflection. She looked every bit the confident judge she had become over the years, but beneath that polished exterior, her heart raced with anticipation. Someone watched her mother with admiration as they prepared to leave. "You look strong, Mom, like a force to be reckoned with." Maya smiled, turning to her daughter. "That's exactly what I intend to be." As they drove to the Internal Affairs building, Maya kept her focus on the case. She visualized every point she needed to make, every piece of evidence she would present. She reminded herself of the victims she was representing, people who had been silenced, dismissed, and left without justice. Today was for them. When they arrived, Marcus was waiting in the lobby, his calm and reassuring presence helping to steady Maya's nerves. The three of them walked into the hearing room, where a panel of officers sat behind a large wooden table, their faces impassive and unreadable. At the far end of the room sat Officer Hayes, flanked by his attorney, who was flipping through a stack of papers with a look of intense concentration. Hayes' expression was noticeably different from the arrogance he had shown during the traffic stop. There was a tension in his posture, a slight nervousness in his gaze as he looked around the room. Detective Harris, the lead investigator from Internal Affairs, opened the proceedings, outlining the complaint and the purpose of the hearing. His tone was clinical, devoid of warmth or empathy, as he explained the routine nature of the investigation. Maya's mind was sharp and clear as she listened to Harris's introductory remarks. She was prepared to counter any attempt to minimize the gravity of the incident. She and Marcus exchanged a glance, silently affirming their shared commitment to seeing this through. As the hearing commenced, Marcus presented their evidence with a precision that left no room for doubt. He highlighted Hayes' actions during the stop, the racial profiling inherent in his approach, and the lack of any legitimate reason for the search. He cited multiple similar cases within the department, establishing a clear pattern of behavior that went beyond a single mistake. When it was Maya's turn to testify, she stood up, every word deliberate and forceful. "I'm here today not just for myself, but for every person who has been treated as though their rights and dignity are irrelevant," she began, her voice unwavering. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger issue within the department, a culture that allows, and perhaps even encourages, racial profiling and harassment under the guise of public safety." She spoke of her own experience, describing the humiliation and anger she had felt, the knowledge that despite her title and accomplishments, she had been reduced to a stereotype. She outlined the facts clearly, leaving no room for interpretation or deflection. When Officer Hayes was called to the stand, his demeanor had changed entirely. Gone was the confident, dismissive officer from that Friday night. Instead, he sat with a defensive posture, his responses carefully rehearsed, as his attorney coached him through every question. "It was just a routine stop," Hayes repeated, his tone uncertain. I was just following protocol." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Routine. You had no probable cause. Judge Lawson committed no traffic violation, and yet you proceeded to search her vehicle. Isn't it true that you acted on an assumption based solely on her appearance?" Hayes stammered, glancing nervously at his attorney, who quickly objected, attempting to redirect the line of questioning. But the damage had been done. Hayes's demeanor, his lack of credible justification, painted a clear picture for everyone in the room. As the hearing continued, Marcus expertly dismantled every weak defense Hayes and his attorney tried to present. The evidence, the testimonies, and Hayes's own contradictions left the panel with little doubt as to the nature of his actions. By the time the hearing adjourned, Maya felt a profound sense of relief. She had spoken her truth, and she had done so with dignity and courage. Now it was up to the panel to decide, but she knew she had done everything she could. As Maya, Marcus, and Simone left the building, Simone hugged her mother tightly. "You were amazing, Mom," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for all of us." Maya looked down at her daughter, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. "Thank you, Simone. I did this for you too, for a future where you don't have to go through what I did." As they walked into the afternoon sun, Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Whatever the outcome, she had faced the system head-on. And no matter the result, she knew she had taken a stand that would echo far beyond this day, inspiring others to challenge injustice wherever it arose. Facing the fallout. The day after the hearing, Maya returned to work at the courthouse, where an uneasy tension had taken hold. Rumors about her complaint against Officer Hayes had spread, and nearly everyone she encountered either stared or offered awkward smiles. Some colleagues avoided eye contact altogether, as though merely acknowledging her might draw unwanted attention to themselves. Maya's status as a respected judge had always afforded her a certain level of decorum from her peers, but now she was the woman who had dared to confront the police publicly. She was no longer just Judge Lawson. She was the judge who had put the system on trial. As she made her way down the hall, she was intercepted by Linda Wong, a fellow judge and a close friend who had been following the case closely. Linda's face wore a concerned expression, and her usual warm demeanor had shifted into something more serious and pensive. "Hey, Maya." Linda greeted her, gently pulling her into an empty office for privacy. "How are you holding up?" Maya offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine, Linda. Really, just dealing with all of this." Linda nodded, glancing out the small window that overlooked the bustling downtown streets below. "You know, some people are worried. They think this might create waves that are hard to control. Challenging the police publicly is risky, especially with your position." Maya looked at her friend, appreciating her concern, but feeling the weight of the fight she'd willingly entered. "I know, Linda, but this isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been on the receiving end of this treatment and hasn't had the means to fight back. If I don't use my platform to speak out, then what's the point?" Linda sighed, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "You're brave, Maya. I don't know many who would do this. But please, be careful. This case is stirring up a lot of tension, and not everyone is as supportive as they seem." Maya nodded, fully aware of the potential repercussions. "Thanks, Linda. I'll keep that in mind." As the day progressed, Maya could feel the weight of unspoken judgments and conversations trailing her wherever she went. She could sense the discomfort in the way her colleagues looked at her, the way the court clerks exchanged glances when she walked by. She was used to attention, but this felt different, more intrusive, more isolating. And though she was determined to stand firm, the reality of the backlash began to settle in. That evening, Maya arrived home to find Simone waiting in the kitchen, her face tight with worry. "Mom, did you see the article?" Simone asked, her voice trembling slightly. Maya's heart sank. What article? Simone turned her phone around, showing Maya an online news piece with the headline, "Judge files complaint against local officer, claims racial profiling in routine traffic stop." The article outlined her complaint, focusing on her status as a judge and implying that her position had given her preferential treatment in getting a hearing so quickly. Maya scanned the article, her stomach churning with anger. The story was laced with insinuations, suggesting that she was using her influence to force a minor complaint through the system. They had twisted the narrative, framing her as privileged, as though she were abusing her authority for personal gain. Simone sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her mother's arm. "Mom, people will see through this. They know who you are." Maya took a deep breath, closing her eyes momentarily to steady herself. "I knew they'd try something like this. I just didn't expect it to happen so fast." Simone's gaze was fierce, her loyalty unwavering. "You can't let this stop you, Mom. You're doing the right thing. And that matters more than what some article says." Maya gave her daughter a small smile. "You're right. This is just part of the journey. I won't let them discredit me." The following morning, Maya met with Marcus in his office to discuss their next steps. Marcus had also seen the article and had already prepared a strategy to counter the negative press. They would gather more voices, more testimonies, more stories to reinforce that this issue was about systemic injustice, not just Maya's complaint. Marcus leaned forward, his hands steepled in front of him. "I expected them to go after you, Maya, but this is quicker than I thought. They're trying to frame this as a personal vendetta instead of what it really is, a fight for justice." Maya nodded, her expression resolute. "Let's fight fire with fire. If they want to frame this as a personal issue, we'll make it public in a way they can't ignore. There are people in this community who have been affected by racial profiling and abuse of power. If they're willing to speak out, we need their voices." Marcus grinned, a glint of determination in his eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already reached out to a few community leaders and activists. They're ready to organize a forum where you can address the community directly. This isn't just about one case anymore, Maya. It's about changing the narrative." Maya felt a surge of strength at Marcus's words. The forum would give her a platform to shed light on the issue in a way that couldn't be silenced or distorted. It was time to speak out, not just in court, but in the very community she served. A few days later, the forum was held in a packed community center, with hundreds of residents filling the seats. Maya stood at the podium, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. She looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, black, white, and brown, all gathered in solidarity. This was the heart of the community she had vowed to serve and protect, and they were here to listen, to understand, and to support. When she began speaking, her voice was calm but powerful. "I stand before you today, not just as a judge, but as a person who has experienced firsthand what it's like to be treated unfairly. I may wear a robe in court, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm still a black woman in a society that too often judges people by the color of their skin." The audience listened intently as Maya recounted the events of that night, describing the humiliation and anger she had felt, the unfairness of being treated with suspicion simply because of her appearance. She emphasized that her story wasn't unique, that it was part of a larger, troubling pattern affecting people across the city. "For too long," she continued, "we've been told to stay quiet, to accept mistreatment as just another part of life. But I'm here to tell you that we don't have to accept it. We don't have to stay silent. This is a fight for dignity, for respect, and for equality. And I won't back down, no matter what they try to say about me." As she spoke, murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Maya felt a surge of strength as she saw nodding heads, heard supportive cheers, and saw the collective resolve of her community standing behind her. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. People approached the microphone to share their own experiences, recounting stories of traffic stops, humiliations, and unjust treatment. Each testimony added weight to Maya's cause, creating an undeniable narrative that couldn't be dismissed as an isolated incident. By the end of the evening, Maya had gathered dozens of statements, each a piece of evidence, each a voice in a collective chorus demanding justice. She had expected the forum to be empowering, but she hadn't anticipated the overwhelming sense of unity and strength that would come from it. After the event, as she stood with Marcus and Simone, Maya felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. They had started something that went beyond her own case. They had ignited a movement. Simone hugged her mother tightly, her voice filled with pride. "Mom, that was incredible. You gave everyone here a voice." Maya hugged her daughter back, feeling the warmth of her community's support around her. "This isn't just about me anymore, Simone. This is a fight we're all part of now." As they left the community center, Maya knew that the path ahead would be difficult. She would face more scrutiny, more attempts to discredit her, and possibly even more personal attacks. But the forum had given her something invaluable, a reminder that she wasn't alone. She had a community standing with her, a collective strength that no article or smear campaign could ever silence. And as she walked into the cool night air, Maya felt more resolute than ever. She would see this through to the end, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been marginalized, profiled, or mistreated. The system might try to push back, but she was prepared for the fight. And this time, she wasn't standing alone. The tides of change. The days following the community forum were both inspiring and challenging for Maya. On one hand, she had the support of people from all walks of life, many of whom continued reaching out to share their stories of profiling, intimidation, and unfair treatment. Their voices reinforced her determination, reminding her that she was not just fighting for herself, but for everyone who had been victimized by a broken system. On the other hand, the backlash was intensifying. News outlets began picking up the story, some spinning it to frame Maya as a rebellious judge undermining police authority. Anonymous emails flooded her inbox, some of them outright hostile. Social media buzzed with polarized opinions, with some people celebrating her bravery and others condemning her actions, accusing her of seeking attention, or using her position to tarnish the honorable image of law enforcement. Despite the mounting pressure, Maya remained steadfast. Her focus was on the upcoming internal affairs decision. They had promised a thorough investigation, but Maya had been in the system long enough to understand what that often meant. Delays, excuses, and attempts to quietly make the problem go away. One evening, as Maya prepared her case notes in her home office, Simone appeared at the doorway, her face solemn. "Mom," she began hesitantly, holding her phone in her hand. "Have you seen this?" Maya looked up, noting the concern in her daughter's expression. She took the phone from Simone and saw a post that had gone viral, a photo of her, taken outside the courthouse, with the caption, "Judge Lawson wants special treatment because of her title. Real citizens respect our officers." The post had attracted hundreds of comments, many of them vile, calling her names, questioning her character, and suggesting she step down. A heavy sigh escaped Maya's lips. She had anticipated resistance, but seeing the backlash in such raw form felt like a gut punch. She had dedicated her career to upholding the law, to providing justice, and now she was the target of hateful remarks for daring to challenge the status quo. Simone watched her mother with a mix of sadness and anger. "I don't understand, Mom. You're trying to make things better, to stand up for everyone. Why can't they see that?" Maya gave her daughter a reassuring smile, though the weight of the situation pressed down on her. "It's easier to attack than to understand, sweetie. Some people are scared of change, scared of the truth. But we're not doing this for them. We're doing this for those who need someone to stand up for them." Simone's face softened, but her eyes held a fierce resolve. "Then let's keep going, Mom. Let them say what they want." The following day, Maya received a call from Marcus. He sounded more upbeat than usual, which immediately piqued her curiosity. "Maya, there's something you should know," he began, unable to hide his excitement. "Since the forum, Several community leaders have started organizing rallies and discussions on racial profiling and police accountability. Your case has sparked something big, Maya. People are finally starting to talk about these issues openly. Maya's spirits lifted at the news. The forum had indeed struck a chord, and knowing that others were carrying the message forward gave her renewed hope. That's incredible, Marcus. I didn't know if people would actually care. They care, he affirmed. More than that, they're willing to act. This isn't just about you anymore. Your courage has inspired an entire community. And that's something they can't silence. Maya felt a sense of pride swell within her. She had been focused on fighting her own battle, but now she saw that her fight was empowering others. It was a powerful realization that even in the face of opposition, her voice had resonated, sparking conversations that had long been suppressed. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you." "It's not over yet," he reminded her, a note of caution in his voice. "I spoke with an insider at Internal Affairs. They're feeling the pressure to conclude this case quietly. They want to resolve it without making waves, maybe issue a vague statement about training or protocol changes." Maya's heart sank. She had hoped that the growing public support would compel Internal Affairs to take decisive action, but it seemed the system was as resistant to change as ever. "What are our options?" she asked, a hard edge in her tone. Marcus was silent for a moment before responding. "If they try to close this case without addressing the real issue, we can consider a civil lawsuit. It's a tough road, but it would force them to face these issues publicly, in court." Maya nodded, absorbing his words. The idea of taking this battle to the courtroom was both exhilarating and daunting. A lawsuit would mean more scrutiny, more exposure, and possibly an even bigger backlash. But if that's what it took to bring real change, she was willing to do it. "Let's keep that option open," she said finally. "If they try to brush this under the rug, we'll bring it to light in a place they can't ignore." Days passed, and Maya continued to receive updates from Marcus and other supporters. The rallies grew larger, with more people sharing their stories and demanding accountability. Community leaders, activists, and even a few local politicians voiced their support for Maya's fight, joining the call for transparency and justice. News outlets, too, began to cover the story more fairly, offering insights into the deeper issues of racial profiling and abuse of power. But with each step forward, the resistance grew more intense. Some of her colleagues at the courthouse grew distant, and a few even questioned her decision to make a spectacle of the police department. She overheard whispered conversations that stung, judgments from people she had once respected. "Maya, is it really worth it?" One of her colleagues, Judge Harris, asked her one afternoon in the courthouse lobby, his tone skeptical. "The police have their way of doing things, and we have ours. Maybe this isn't a fight worth having." Maya looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "If this isn't a fight worth having, then what is, Harris? Our job is to uphold justice, and that doesn't stop at the courthouse doors. If people in power abuse their authority, it's our duty to call them out." Harris shook his head, his expression one of disappointment. "Just be careful, Maya. Sometimes pushing too hard has consequences." As he walked away, Maya felt a familiar pang of isolation, but she reminded herself that standing alone, even if it was uncomfortable, was better than standing silent. She had spent too many years upholding a justice system that claimed to be impartial and fair. Now it was time to demand that it actually lived up to those ideals. One night, as she sat with Simone in their living room, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered, half expecting another threat or insult. Instead, she heard the voice of an elderly man, soft but firm. "Judge Lawson?" he asked, his tone tentative. "My name is James Ellis. I don't know if you remember me, but years ago, you were my son's public defender. He'd been wrongfully accused of a crime, and you fought for him like he was your own. You saved him, and I never forgot that." Maya's memory of the case returned in flashes. The long hours, the frustration of fighting an unfair system, the joy of finally clearing the boy's name. "Yes, Mr. Ellis, I remember. How is your son?" "He's doing well, thanks to you," he replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "I wanted to call you because I heard about what you're doing now. I know this fight must be hard, but please, don't give up. You're fighting for people like my son, for people who don't have a voice." The sincerity in his voice touched Maya deeply. She thanked him, feeling the strength of his words lift her spirits. When she hung up, she looked over at Simone, who had been listening quietly, her eyes glistening with pride. "See, Mom," Simone said softly. "You're making a difference." Maya hugged her daughter tightly, feeling the weight of her mission settle into something deeper, a purpose beyond titles, beyond reputation. She was fighting for real people, people who had felt the sting of injustice and had been waiting for someone, anyone, to stand up and say, "Enough." As she sat there, Maya knew the path ahead was still fraught with challenges. But for the first time, she felt truly prepared. She wasn't just a judge fighting a personal battle. She was a voice for her community, a beacon of resilience in a sea of resistance. And no matter what internal affairs decided, no matter how the department tried to spin the outcome, Maya was ready to keep pushing forward. Her voice had become one of many, part of a growing movement that demanded accountability, transparency, and true justice. In the silence of that evening, Maya made a vow to herself and to everyone she was fighting for. She would not stop until the system was held accountable, no matter the cost. The verdict and the path forward. The day of the internal affairs decision arrived, bringing with it a sense of anticipation and unease that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Maya had prepared herself for all possible outcomes, but the stakes felt higher than ever. The city had been buzzing with talk of her case, and the pressure on internal affairs to deliver a fair, transparent decision was unprecedented. As Maya and Simone arrived at the courthouse, they were greeted by a crowd that had gathered outside. Supporters held signs with slogans like "Justice for All" and "End Racial Profiling Now," while local activists gave impassioned speeches about the importance of accountability and the need for systemic change. Reporters from various news outlets lined the steps, their cameras capturing every moment. Maya felt a surge of gratitude and solidarity as she took in the sight. These were her people, community members who had stood by her, shared their stories, and added their voices to the call for change. They weren't just here for her. They were here for themselves, for their loved ones, and for everyone who had suffered silently under an unjust system. Simone squeezed her mother's hand. "Look at all these people, Mom. They're here because of you, because you refused to stay silent." Maya smiled, pride and resolve radiating from her. "I may have started this, but it's all of us who will finish it." They made their way through the courthouse, with Marcus waiting just inside the main lobby. His face was serious, but when he saw them, he offered a supportive nod. He had been an invaluable ally through all of this, handling the legal battles and guiding her through the media scrutiny. As they entered the hearing room, Maya's heart raced. At the head of the room sat a panel of internal affairs officers, their expressions guarded. Detective Harris, who had led the investigation, stood at a lectern, a thick file of documents in his hands. Across the room, Officer Hayes sat with his attorney, looking tense and visibly anxious. Gone was the smug arrogance he had displayed during their initial encounter. In its place was the nervousness of a man who knew he might be held accountable for his actions. Detective Harris cleared his throat and addressed the room. "We're here today to deliver our findings in the case involving Officer Art Hayes and Judge Maya Lawson. After a thorough investigation, we have reviewed the evidence presented, including testimony from both parties and records from similar complaints within the department." Maya held her breath, bracing herself for what was to come. She could feel Simone's hand in hers, a steadying presence, and glanced at Marcus, whose expression was unreadable. He had warned her that the panel might try to downplay the situation or offer only a mild reprimand. But Maya was determined to push forward, regardless of the outcome. Detective Harris continued, his voice even but cautious. Our findings indicate that Officer Hayes acted inappropriately during the traffic stop in question. His actions did not align with departmental standards, and his conduct was unprofessional. In light of these findings, Officer Hayes will be suspended without pay for a period of 6 months. Furthermore, he will be required to attend training focused on racial bias and de-escalation tactics. Maya's heart sank. A suspension and mandatory training. That was it. After all the testimonies, the evidence, and the countless stories from community members who had suffered similar treatment, this was the extent of the consequences. She felt a surge of frustration and disappointment. The decision felt like a slap on the wrist, a way for the department to feign accountability without enacting real change. The room was silent, with many of her supporters exchanging dismayed glances. Maya took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. She had anticipated this, prepared for the possibility that the system would resist true accountability. But she knew this was far from over. As the hearing concluded, Maya stood up, her gaze fixed on the panel. "Thank you for your decision," she said, her tone measured but firm. "However, I hope you understand that this is only the beginning. A suspension and mandatory training may address one individual's actions, but they do nothing to address the systemic issues that led to this incident in the first place." Detective Harris looked taken aback, and a murmur rippled through the room. Maya's voice grew stronger as she continued. "This isn't about one officer making a mistake. It's about a pattern of behavior, a culture of bias that has harmed countless people. And if the department won't take the necessary steps to address this, then we will." The murmurs grew louder, and several of Maya's supporters began to clap. Officer Hayes looked down, his face flushed with embarrassment, while his attorney frantically whispered in his ear. With Marcus by her side, Maya left the hearing room, her mind already racing with plans. She knew what she had to do next. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded her, their questions loud and insistent. "Judge Lawson, do you feel justice was served? Do you think the suspension was enough? What will you do next?" Maya held up a hand, signaling for quiet. The crowd fell silent, their attention riveted on her. "I appreciate the department's decision," she began, her voice carrying strength and conviction. "But I believe more must be done. This case is not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a larger problem, a problem that affects communities across our country. Racial profiling, abuse of authority, and a lack of accountability are issues that cannot be fixed with a mere suspension." She glanced at Simone, who stood beside her, proud and supportive, then at Marcus, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Today, I'm announcing the formation of a community coalition dedicated to addressing these issues head-on," she continued. "We will work with local leaders, activists, and citizens to push for real reform in our police department. This coalition will demand transparency, accountability, and meaningful change, and we won't stop until those demands are met." The crowd erupted in applause, and Maya felt a surge of energy coursed through her. She knew that starting a coalition was a daunting task, but she was ready. She had seen the power of her community, felt the strength of their shared experiences, and she knew that together, they could make a difference. As she walked away from the courthouse, Maya felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her fight had expanded beyond her personal encounter with Officer Hayes. It had become a mission to challenge an entire system. And she knew, with Simone and Marcus by her side, she wouldn't be fighting alone. In the weeks that followed, the coalition took shape. Local activists, community leaders, and concerned citizens came together, organizing meetings, discussing policies, and setting goals. Maya worked tirelessly, attending forums, speaking at rallies, and meeting with city officials to demand transparency in law enforcement practices. She became a central figure in the movement, her voice a powerful force for change. The coalition's influence grew, drawing attention from media outlets across the country. Maya received invitations to speak at conferences, join panels on racial justice, and even testify before state legislators about the need for police reform. The more she spoke, the more people reached out to share their own stories, each one adding fuel to the fire that was driving her forward. Through it all, Maya remained grounded by her connection to the community. She continued to hold forums where people could share their experiences, and she used those stories to highlight the urgency of reform. Her work was far from over, but each step forward felt like a victory, a testament to the resilience of those who refused to be silenced. One evening, as Maya sat on her porch with Simone, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Mom," Simone said softly, "do you think this will really change things?" Maya looked at her daughter, a small smile playing on her lips. "Change doesn't happen overnight, Simone. It's slow, and it's hard. But every voice, every story, every act of courage brings us closer. And if we keep pushing, keep speaking up, I believe real change is possible." Simone nodded, her eyes bright with hope. "I believe that too. And I'm so proud of you, Mom." Maya wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "This isn't just my fight, Simone. It's yours too. It's for everyone who deserves to live in a world where justice isn't just a word, but a reality." As they sat together, watching the city lights flicker on in the distance, Maya felt a profound sense of peace. She knew there would be more battles ahead, more resistance, and more challenges. But she also knew that she was part of something bigger, something that could shape the future for generations to come. In the months and years that followed, Maya's coalition continued to grow, becoming a powerful force for accountability and reform. They challenged unjust policies, held town hall meetings, and educated the public on their rights. Maya saw firsthand the power of a united community, the strength that came from standing together, and the undeniable impact of a single voice refusing to be silenced. And as the movement she had started continued to gain momentum, Maya knew that her decision to speak out had been the right one. Her journey had been painful, exhausting, and at times isolating, but it had been worth every sacrifice. For Maya, this was more than a victory. It was a testament to the power of resilience, the courage to face adversity, and the unbreakable strength of a community determined to create a world where justice was not just a promise, but a lived truth.